So three. There's in transmedia storytelling, there is one universe with many stories, and we can kind of think about this in a couple of different ways, and I'll detail them again with more granularity as we go throughout the course of the semester. But first, transmedia stories tend to be one universe with many stories. So we can think of something like Star Wars as a really easy example of this, where there's what's considered the kind of canon movies of Star Wars, the various sequels and prequels, as well as various books that have come out that are either considered part of that Star Wars story world or not. Perhaps if there's fan fiction written about that Star Wars world, we tend to think about that as maybe not being part of the canon, but kind of tangential to the story world. You also have all manner of things like merchandising and ways that users and people who appreciate Star Wars can kind of get into that universe. So you have, again, several different entry points or rabbit holes to kind of access this very large story world, and the idea being that you can kind of interact with that story world in the way that you want to. In many ways, you can kind of focus on the characters or the narratives that you're interested in. So those are transmedia stories. They tend to kind of have one universe with many stories within. Another type of transmedia story would be an alternate reality game, or ARGs, something I'm going to focus on pretty heavily next week when we get into more of our case studies and looking at transmedia as a kind of an interactive game. As well as a narrative, and you guys will be getting into that a little bit this week with the Game Design as Narrative Architecture reading from Henry Jenkins. But alternate reality games are essentially one story that takes place across different media with a focus on narrative game elements. So in ARGs, it's typically a structure that's kind of put on top of reality, where you're kind of trying to figure out a puzzle or something that needs to be kind of harnessing a collective intelligence with multiple people across the internet to kind of figure out a particular story or riddle or game kind of thing. But there's kind of traditionally one story that is kind of superimposed above reality somehow. Maybe a really low form easy example to give you would be something like augmented reality games like Pokemon Go, which kind of uses your mobile phone technology to kind of superimpose a structure on top of that to kind of play a game within that. So we can kind of maybe think about Pokemon Go as a really easy example of something that might be kind of close to an alternate reality game. Last one that I'm going to list is cross-media stories, which is maybe somewhere in the middle between transmedia and alternate reality games, where we're kind of conceptualizing this story more in terms of interaction and co-developing and co-creating between the reader and the author. A good example of this might be something like Kathy's book from Sean Stewart, who's doing the Bard 5.0 video this week. Kathy's book was one of the first book series to embed YouTube links and kind of make different rabbit holes for readers to kind of access different content of that story. So that's the third tenet. Typically we're kind of like trying to house one universe with many different possible story points there along the way.